All right, hi everyone. My name's Corey Schneider. First of all, an apology if anybody was expecting Corey Schneider, the former goalie for the Vancouver Canucks. I'm not him, sorry. By chance, he's also ginger, respect, but sadly I'm not him. I'm just me. So, yeah, let's get started with a little bit of background on me and WHITEvoid. So I've been using TouchDesigner for 6, going on 7 years. My background before that was in web development, working on open source CMSs with Drupal and PHP. But that got pretty boring, so I went through a VJ phase, as I think most of us do. And then I tried to branch out into more applications of creative technology for more integrated and interactive systems, and ended up becoming a freelance TouchDesigner developer. And after my training montage working on a bunch of independent projects in Melbourne, which looked like this, doing various audiovisual performance work, installation work, working on music videos, driving a bunch of DMX lighting fixtures with TouchDesigner, integrating with Ableton, rolling my own kind of TD Ableton before TD Ableton came along, going through the VJ phase and doing a bunch of projection mapping, and then more interactive, high-tech, higher-tech type projects. I decided it was time to leave Melbourne and come to Berlin. No. Oh, God. And I was lucky enough to land a job at WHITEvoid quite quickly after moving to Berlin. And WHITEvoid, if I can get my notes back. Sorry. I should have made this in TouchDesigner. There we go. So WHITEvoid is based in Berlin. It's a design studio, and it was founded by a Bavarian artist named Christopher Bauder, this guy. There's 2 arms to the firm. One side's the creative agency that dreams up all the magic and is responsible for producing the software. And the other side of the business is Kinetic Lights, which handles the engineering and the manufacture of all the hardware that we invent to realize these creative installations. And it's a fascinating place to work for a nerd like me. And the best part is, all the work that we do in software is done in TouchDesigner. Once upon a time, there was an old control system made in V4, but Marcus Heckman, legend, came along and put a stop to that and got us into the TouchDesigner world. And he helped rebuild the control software that WHITEvoid had initially in TouchDesigner 088, which looks something like this. Depending on the hardware that you have connected to the system and how much additional development you've done to solve a problem specific to the installation that you're working on. But more on that topic later. So what do we do with this system? Kinetic light installations. So in short, we take an array of DMX-controlled mechanical winches, we attach a light element on the end of the cable, and we move it up and down. And we send power down the cable to light up the attached element in different beautiful colors. So the photos on this page are more on the simple side of what the system can do. The ones over, These ones here are called electric moons. They're a bit different. They use helium in the balloon to pull the cable out of the winch and make it move up in the air, as opposed to the other ones which use the weight of the element attached to the cable to pull it down as the cable spins out of the winch. So, the way the software works is you input some information about your physical setup. How many elements do you have? How are they laid out? The height that they should be at the top and at the bottom of the operating range of the winch. And then after you've done that, you can get into designing the cues by choosing generative component modules for the motion that you want to see and the light that you want to see. And then you can tweak the parameters of those generative modules to your taste. And then you can create presets from those parameters and attach them to cues and arrange them in a playlist. So it's already pretty magical what you can pull off with that simple approach. This is from a show in China called Apolog. A whole bunch of spheres. Pretty cool. But then we can make it a bit more interesting and attach 2 winches to one element and move that in space on 2 axes now instead of just straight up and down. So this introduces some more challenges to what we have to do on the software side. Now we have to be careful that we don't run one winch all the way down and one all the way up and have this thing hanging slack and bashing into other things in the space. And we've developed a whole bunch of tools along the way to make that reasonably easy to deal with and safe. So after you've gone to 2 connections, the logical next step is to go to 3. And the picture on this page is from an installation that we did in collaboration with Robert Henk called Grid. Robert's also in town from UTech this week, and he's a legend. Shout out to Robert. He did a multi-channel sound composition for this installation, and we did an updated version of this show in 2013 at a new venue in Zurich for a Volvo event. So Robert and I had the pleasure of sitting together in the dark and painstakingly programming all the audio cues and all the lighting and motion cues to hit and sync and create a cohesive experience for the audience. And that was really fun. And it was while I was working on this project that I started to have ideas about the main topic of this talk, how to improve the content creation workflow. Because it was fun, but it was tedious. I started having ideas around portability of content and reusability of components that we build in TouchDesigner that we want to be able to take out of one project, drop into another project, and have it work as we expect. So this came about because this piece has been exhibited before in 2 separate forms before I had the chance to work on it. Both shows had a different layout. One had half as many triangles again as this one, so it was bigger. And another one had the same amount of triangles as the show that I was working on in Zurich. So I thought I could start from that show and remix it. But of course, I could only find the backup of the software for the bigger version and the content that we created for the smaller version. And this was my first experience of realizing that presets mean nothing if you don't have the full system. And this was really frustrating and led me to come up with a better way. But more on that later. So 3 winches is a limit in terms of what creative options it opens up for you by just attaching more winches to an element and adding more options for positioning and rotating that thing. You get diminishing returns, and it just gets more complicated and expensive to have more hardware in the mix. There's not much you can do with 5 winches that you can't do with 3. So what do you add next? Lasers, of course. So this is Deep Web. We first exhibited this in 2016 in Berlin and then again in Lyon. And we're doing a version of this again right now in the Kraftwerk in Berlin. We've had over 10,000 visitors on the 4 live show dates that we did again with Robert Henk, jamming his tunes live in the Kraftwerk. Really cool experience, and I wish that everyone had a chance to see it. It's really fun. And we had a whole bunch more people coming through and seeing the exhibition version of the show, which plays on a loop during the day. It was a blast working on this project, and I learned so much about lasers And huge thanks to Derivative for their development work, especially to Markus Heckman for helping us out with laser calibration and tracking tools, and to the developers in general for the new laser chop. It's awesome. So working on this, I had a similar problem to Grid, where the original deep web content was created in an old KLC 088 patch that ran the original deep web. And of course, the generative modules that we build in there to drive these winches and shoot lasers at them are really tightly coupled to a specific branch of the control software specifically for this project. And the problem we had was we need to interface with these lasers in a new way via AVB. The first time around, it was done via OSC through a third-party software provided by Solinger Laser Animation, but he doesn't necessarily want to be responsible for doing all the calibration and being there in the middle of the night all the time, so we have to take it on ourselves. And we decided to use the laser chop. But of course, to do that, you need the current build of 099, and we were working in 088. So we came up with a shortcut method to pipe the content out of the old software into the new software, make the most of what we had in the old content combined with the new features that we developed in the 3 years since, and have a kind of hybrid Frankenstein system, which worked really well, thankfully. So the next question is, where do you go after lasers? And the answer is, of course, just to throw every piece of multimedia technology in existence into a pyramid and crank it all up to 11 and blow people's minds. So for this project, we had the first deployment of a new piece of hardware, a new winch that we call Winch L, and new lighting elements specifically designed to work with that winch. The pyramid has 100 and something Winch M units, which are the older winches that we've been using for all of our installations up until now, and 100 something Winch L units. And these things are awesome. They now have 15 meters in operating range, which is twice as long as the original winches can go. And they can travel really fast. I forget the number. I think it's around 5 meters per second, but I'm not sure. One of the engineers told me that it's approaching the speed of free fall if you really drive the motor, which is kind of scary, but also kind of awesome. And there's 100 speakers, heaps of projectors, heaps of lasers, heaps of LEDs and moving head fixtures in the pyramid. And there's other kinetic elements that are provided by other companies in there as well. There's a sphere that opens up and triples in size and levitates. It's crazy. So this is actually open now in Montreal. I'm sure most of you have heard about it, but if you haven't, go check it out. I haven't seen it yet, because sadly I wasn't working on this project, because I was in Las Vegas working on this project, which is the successor to the Grid project that we did with Robert Henk. The original Grid's like an ambient techno soundscape connoisseur. This one is kind of like Grid's teenage niece who's into Lil Jon and loves Las Vegas and bling. It's very flashy. It's similar in its architectural design, but it's pimped out and pixel mapped with LEDs on a big irregular mesh of triangular shapes that becomes a moving ceiling sculpture that we can deform in real time to the beat of the tunes the DJs are playing. And there's also a certain amount of the triangles are filled with a mirror, and we can track those mirrors and shoot beams of light on them from moving headlight fixtures and reflect them around the room as we film. So this project was the first that we delivered in 100% rebuilt, fresh, up-to-date, latest build of TouchDesigner 099 version of our control software, which we're calling KLC3. And it had to be a complete rebuild because the existing software doesn't support a mix of irregular elements like we would need to do this. So usually, in everything you've seen in the pictures up until now, has been the same shape, instanced a whole bunch of times, and deformed with the same rules applying to every element in the array. So for this project, though, it needs to be more complicated than that because we have irregular shapes, different types of elements. There's a disco ball in the mix. Some of these triangles have mirrors, some don't, and we have to be able to handle all of that. So I saw this as a chance to test out some of my ideas about content creation. And I've got some photos. So designing content for this thing is a totally different beast than designing content for an array of 100 spheres. We ended up having to do a whole lot of rethinking our content creation workflow. And what I decided was, instead of having closed modules with parameters that play out across the entire canvas, I wanted to have something that was more open, more flexible, more targeted, so that we could pull off some of these looks where we have different characteristics of motion happening at the same time on different parts of the installation, and ended up working out really well. It's a great effect. This was a funny one. Steve Aoki is kind of known for being a bit crazy when he performs and jumping up on the stage and throwing cakes in people's face. So on the opening night, he jumped up on stage and popped a Magnum bottle of champagne and sprayed it all over our mirrors and LEDs that we'd just hung above him. So in response to that, I built a Aoki button on the console. So it's mapped to the lighting operator's console. He can press this button when Aoki jumps up, and it's targeted to the area specifically that he would be able to reach when he jumps onto the booth. Because, yeah, who knows? He might have jumped out and swung on something, and then we'd have a bad time. That was fun. So let's get into the demo of what I created. Now, this is still a prototype, work in progress. It pains me to show it looking so unpolished and unthemed. But it should get across the concept of how I want the content creation to happen in this software from now on. Start with the old way. So this is a screenshot of the interface for the original software that we have. This section here is the parameters for the motion module that's active. And these are the parameters for the light, the color map that gets played across the installation. So let's enhance. I don't actually have the old software on my laptop at the moment, so this is just a zoom in of the same screenshot. But it's not really important. I can explain what these parameters are. This module here is called wave. It just generates a simple motion pattern of a wave moving across the installation. You've got the speed, amplitude, peaks, which is frequency. Wait. Yes, frequency. Amplitude, direction, range, all the basic stuff you need to get a wave going. So you can save the changes you've made to a pattern just by hitting save. If it's already been externalized, it saves to its current path on disk. This will update as soon as I click this. I'm still getting my head around the lister component, and if Ivan's around, I'd love to have a chat with you about this. Sweet. The standard lister features are here. You can what's the shortcut to edit a cell in the lister? Edit text, yeah. Alt something? Well, let's just imagine that I renamed that. I can't remember the shortcut, but you can edit this cell right here, and it gets pushed to the parameter here, to the display name. So moving on from interacting here at this level, this is patterns. Here you see the parameters for the operator that you have highlighted in the hierarchy. So I can change the parameters specific to the pattern that I'm working on here. And as soon as I change these, this becomes dirty. So the idea is that instead of creating a preset, I just save out the state of the parameters of the component into the tox directly and use the tox as my preset. And I felt a bit weird about this at first because it seems like I'm going backwards and that my preset system is a bit hard-coded. But it's also extremely simple. It's all there for you. The parameters are built especially for that purpose, and you can just save it to disk with one click. So the other thing that I thought would be really handy is if you allow someone to create a combination of any kind of magic from over here, and they have hundreds of these modules with hundreds of parameters on them that they want to tune, they probably want to tune them all in one place. So came up with a quick little script to allow you to drag and drop parameters from inside your component up to the top level. So this is kind of like publishing the parameters, and you have access to the parameters of the modules themselves and to the compositing controls. All at the top. So this is a very ugly, very nonsense effect that I've created, but you can imagine this going out to an LED wall or to a certain projector or to the color map for the entire kinetic installation that we have. To show how this works, we can add even more tiling. Why not? This comes in here. Let's crank the contrast, invert it, make it more ugly. I might want to be able to do that live, so I'll put it over here. And tile it even more. Sure, why not? This shows you the state coming into this module, this effect, and then the state coming out. And you can bypass all of the effects at that level of the chain with one toggle. So that's how the front end looks. Let's have a look at what this is actually doing in the back end. Cool, that's much easier. So basically, all of the callbacks that fire when you interact with these cells in the lister are just firing Python functions in the extension. So I'll give these color so it's a bit easier to see. As I move these operators around, you can see they jump in the network and they're rewired into the composite top in the order that I have them in the hierarchy over here. It's pretty simple scripting, but it's pretty cool, powerful way to work once you get into that headspace. The composite top takes its parameters from the composite comp. They're linked there. There's some extra stuff in here to create the pre and post visual. The effects that you add to the end of the chain go into this component and they behave exactly the same. If you reorder things here, they reorder in the network and get rewired before going to the output. And we can go deeper. This is what it looks like inside a layer. Same concept. We're in layer 1. In here you can are we in layer 1? We're in this one. Well, you get the idea. So the idea is that with this approach, someone who's not familiar with working with TouchDesigner and not necessarily even familiar with working with a visual programming environment can use a simple hierarchy where they can work from left to right, starting at the smallest building blocks, combining them into layers, compositing the layers the way that they want to form a look, and then being able to save and recall that look as a preset and even put that look on a USB stick or back it up in the cloud and then use it the next time they use the software on a different machine without having to worry about, did I create this preset in the version of the software that I'm going to be using when I go to my next job using the software? Because everything that these modules need to do their job is self-contained within the modules. The classes, the extension code lives in the module. So if you make something especially complicated that needs its own Python extension, you can store that inside your module, and that goes with it everywhere it goes. And as long as the modules follow this basic structure that the pattern editor extension expects when interacting with these operators via Python methods, everything will work. And if you come to a situation where there's something that you can't achieve using this view, you can always just pop open a network window and start hacking in the network like you always would with Touch. And the other thing that I really like about this is that it can serve as a gateway for people who are used to operating lighting consoles or VJ software who haven't thought of themselves as programmers, but we can kind of coax them into working in the network and seeing the effects that their choices have when they're choosing parameters and presets over here in the network, and getting to learn what tops are, what chops are, what different combinations of these operators end up generating in the output. And this is just a quick view of the automatic content importing. So it's just some replicators that look on the disk in a path that you specify and pull in collections of contents that I'm calling acts. So there's like an act, and below that is a scene, which is a combination of different patterns for different destinations in your installation. So you have a light pattern, a motion pattern, maybe you have a laser pattern, and those together make a scene. And a scene is what you can then attach to a queue, and you can fire that based on a playlist or an ArtNet trigger or whatever you can imagine. I think that's all I wanted to show in here. That's the basic idea. It's interesting. When I wrote the description for what I wanted to talk about at the conference, I called this talk "Novel Approaches to Content Management." And in the end, it's not really novel. It's just using the basic features of TouchDesigner for managing your components, but wrapping it in a UI that is intuitive and extendable. And I think with this system, I'll be able to save myself a lot of headaches with being able to port work from one project to another, and hopefully get some of the people who work with our software who aren't touch designers excited about learning a bit more about how it works and contributing their own modules to the system that we can use. So with that, I will finish up. Once I figure out how to get this full screen again. Or not. So we're hiring, and we'd love to have each and every one of you. But we can't have you all. So if you're interested in working for WHITEvoid or working on projects like this, please get in touch. We have some of my colleagues here as well. Maurice is sitting here in the center. And there's also Tra, I can't see her here, she's at the back. These guys are here to make friends, hand out business cards, tell you more about the company. It's a really great studio, really great opportunities for travel, working on really cool and exciting projects. We've got a whole engineering department and a workshop. You can prototype and tinker and do lots of awesome nerdy stuff every day of the week. And you get to live in Berlin, which would be pretty, I mean, Montreal's pretty great, but Berlin's also not bad. Yeah, that's me. Thanks, guys.
Cool, okay. Cool, that was amazing, thank you. And I'd like to say that system is beautiful. He's designing, the way that they're working is exactly the way that we're kind of trying to make, or creating a workflow that everyone's kind of following. It looks a bit like a very familiar system to the ways that we would work even at derivatives. So I'm super happy to see these smaller networks that are modular, that less spaghetti code. We used to all make these big, huge, massive systems. So it's nice to see things getting more modular, and that's very exciting to see. So anyway, so who's got a question? Anybody at the back? I'm on my way.
Can you explain a little bit about how, like for the deep web installation version, more your timeline-driven approach, or the live performances, how that might look for Robert or for Christopher, what they might be doing live versus what they might be doing when it's in installation mode?
Sure. So with the software version that Deep Web runs on, we don't have any inbuilt timelining. There's a very naive playlisting feature where you can add the duration that a queue should run for and kind of like a follow action, which queue should come next. But for a show like that, we lean heavily on Ableton Live, and Robert has made Max for Live devices which take MIDI automation, MIDI notes and program changes and forward them over OSC into TouchDesigner. So for the live shows, there's a bunch of audio that plays as the background, and then there's elements that Robert jams and remixes on the fly, and those clips themselves have automation envelopes that get forwarded as well. So a lot of the live jamming of the live performances is coming from Ableton. We've also got some top layer controls that you can manipulate for the installation on MIDI controllers. But when you're designing something as specific and contoured and planned as the drama from one scene to the next in deep web, we found that it's usually better to stick to the script and not try to create motion on the fly, because it's difficult.
It's an amazing system. It's really well done.
Thanks.
How would you go about porting your system into something that's more of a touchscreen interface? Because I find widgets are a little bit small if you were to put them on a touchscreen. Yeah,
well, with the parameter comp that I'm using, that's obviously not the final destination for user input. I'm excited about patching widgets into this system and using touchscreen for interaction. What we seem to be doing more of at the moment is externalizing the control to lighting consoles and to other show control protocols, queues and preset recall and parameter changes coming in over TCP. So it's in the pipeline, but beyond using widgets and designing specifically for touchscreen input, I guess there's also MIDI OSC.
Anyone else? Okay, on my way.
Greg's next.
Hi. I'm not sure if you're dealing with this very often, but how do you deal with loading dynamic content on the fly or in real time? Do you do that, or is everything preloaded?
Good question. I actually forgot to speak about this. With this system, there's the drawback that because these are all toxes, and TouchDesigner has the single thread for loading stuff in and out, if you try to do this on the fly, you get the lurch of the compiling and the rendering. I hit a bottleneck when I was in Las Vegas where we had a work session where we created 100 new patterns, hit save, went home for the night, came back in the morning, launched the tow, and the tow wouldn't open because we ran out of resources. It was we ran out of GPU RAM or something, and we just had to go back and manually import these toxes one by one. And then we started breaking them down into smaller containers. So we had everything happening in one directory, and it was all coming in all at once. And then we moved to refreshing smaller collections of content. And we just make sure that everything we're going to need for the session is ready before we go. Beyond that, you just have to hope that there's a moment where there's not meant to be any motion, and you can load in the next container of toxes. If anyone's got any advice on how to load toxes on the fly without freezing things, send me an email.
Yeah. Cool. Greg?
Yeah, like Jared said, this is kind of a very modern way of best practices of designing things, because we've been through so many iterations at Derivative and with our users and how to best control things, where your master data is held in, is it chops or is it held in parameters or whatever. So, I mean, one thing which you did here, as you explained, was that you try to keep a correspondence between what is in your listers on the left and so on, and what's in your network, right? You add something here, a node appears in your network, and I think that's a really great way of thinking, because that's really using operators and their hierarchy and the parameters and corresponding to your UI. That's kind of like a nice tight binding together. Also, I see you're using binding of parameters as well, which is great. But and also, I think I heard from Marcus that you even every winch is a component. Is that?
That's true. Yeah.
Right. So before, each winch was a row of a table.
Exactly.
Right? So I used to work that way too. A row of tables. So I was like a big table freak. And then custom parameters came out and said, "Fuck, I'll put everything in as a node with custom parameters in it." And that's how time-based works, and that's how you're working here as well. So, what's that? And System's way of doing it, yeah, as well. So I think we're kind of gravitating towards the same kind of things, but not always at the same time, and we're always evolving our best practices. So it's great to see that. What other notes did? Oh yeah, I also sympathize with you about the mystery of the lister component and how to make it do shit, because it's like I just look at it and go, well, where do I begin, kind of thing. So we really got to make improvements on how to construct the columns and how you interact with them and stuff like that without so much coding. So this is one of our challenges as derivatives, to come up with a better interface to making these lister things. What else? Mixing patterns. Oh yeah, I guess a question also on how do you mix patterns together, and do you have a way of like having some part of your array do one pattern and another part of your array do another pattern, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I didn't show it here because I don't have all of the nuts and bolts with me, and they're not all feature complete and ready to be on display just yet. But we have tools that exist as modules like anything else that you can add into the chain of operators, and they allow you to select groups that get generated into masks that composite together and give you, if you're working in the top world, they give you a top with the different layer inputs going to different outputs, basically. It's kind of an inline routing system. And we have a similar thing that happens for chops as well when we're dealing with laser signals.
Yeah, so you're using kind of masks to blend multiple things together into one output.
Yeah, we decided to keep it in line, to make it easier for people to follow the same flow from left to right.
Okay, and as a former web developer, how do you see like this kind of way of working in TouchDesigner versus what were you doing before?
I love it. I love how immediate everything is, that you can throw down a node and you get instant feedback to what it's going to do. I would really love, though, to be able to have the option to export my components to something that's not binary. And I'm sure that's not a simple request, but it would be great to be able to see line-by-line changes for like system stuff that we keep in the application that loads in the binary components. So having tighter control over that would be really good. For users of the system making their own content, it's better just to have a binary they can save out and load and be portable.
Yeah, so we're working on ASCII versions, gettable kind of saving of toxes and stuff like that. So we'll talk about it later on today.
Sweet.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.